Okay, so this is our first video on quadratic equations. And if you go to the OneNote, you can see it in the content page. There's a teaching sequence. So our plan is to finish the quadratic equations within the 4 lessons. For the first 3 lessons, they are all about the revisions of the things we've learned in year 10. Okay, and there's one extra lesson on discriminant. That's the new thing. All right, and if you go to the quadratic equation page, I've uploaded part 1, part 2, part 3. I hope I could finish these 3 parts in 3 lessons. I will try. Sorry. So we will see how it goes. All right. Okay. So first of all, let's start with the quadratic equations part 1, solving quadratic equations. Oh, sorry, it's not this one. Should be that one. Okay, so this is solving quadratic equation by factorization. Okay, so first of all, what do we mean by solving an equation? I need to give you a little bit understanding. Okay, because there's some math language you need to understand. So when we see in math, when we say solve an equation, that usually means you need to find a value normally for x. Okay, so that the equation is satisfied. What does it mean? Like in year 8 or earlier, you've learned, like, we ask you to solve 2x, okay, equals 8. Okay, so what does it mean? That means you need to find an x in which then by which you can multiply by 2 and equals 8. And so we know what it means. Okay, so the solution would just be you transpose 2 to the right hand side, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that's how it works. Okay, but then in year 10, then we face some more difficult equations. Like you might see the situation like, how can we solve a quadratic equation like this one? So it's not as easy as the linear equation because you have 2x here, one's the x squared. So that's why we need to develop some methods to show that. To do so, first we introduce a law called Null Factor Law, if you still remember the name. Okay, we all understand null just means 0. Okay, so the law states that if you have 2 numbers multiplied together equals 0, so that's a product of 2 numbers equals 0. So that 0 is very important. So if you have something multiplied together equals 0, then either one of the 2 numbers must be 0. So that means either u equals 0 or v equals 0. Okay? So use that law that could help us to solve the quadratic equations. But before we move on to solve different forms of quadratic equations, let's just try to look at some of the factor forms. So all these are factor forms of the quadratic equation because they are in factors. Okay, they are all in 2 factors, and they all multiply together equals 0. So how can you solve it? By applying the Null Factor Law, we know all you need to do is to recognize that 2 factors multiplied together equals 0. So we will say x equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so that's exactly what null factor law means. And so it's very easy then. Then you have two answers. Okay, and how about the second one? So second one, you still have two factors. Okay, then what should I write? I need to write x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, remember you have to write that word, it's or, to link two solutions. Okay. Alright, so that means either x plus 1 equals 0 or x plus 3 equals 0. And of course, you will have x equals minus 1, x equals minus 3. Okay, how about the last one? So I would like to give you like 30 seconds to work on this one. Okay, so you could pause the video, see if you need more time. I might just give you 30 seconds. So now start counting. Okay, I think it's about the time, right? Okay, again, you see there are two factors. So the first step is just like what we did before. And there are few more steps. First, you need to transpose the number plus 1 and the number minus 2 to the right hand side. I hope you still remember why we need to do so. You always transpose the number which is further away from x first. Alright, and the last step is just divide that numbers to the right hand side. So you have two solutions. So you see most of the quadratic equations, they will have two solutions. Okay, because you can factorize them into two factors. But I mean most of them, that doesn't mean all of them. Okay, we will see that later. Okay, so you see that's how it is. Once you are in factor form, so let's say these are in factor form. Once they are factorized in a factor form, then you have two factors multiplied together equals 0. Then you could use null factor law. Okay, so that's why for the following questions, we are going to solve quadratic equations by using factorization. Okay, factorization means give you a quadratic equations, whatever it is. Okay, you will try to factorize them into two factors times equals 0. Okay, and then you can use the null factor law. So that's the idea. Okay, so you need to have that idea in your mind. So try to factorize them, but there are different ways to do factorization, aren't they? Okay, and the first of all is just the simplest one, taking out common factors. So like here for A, you see there are two terms. That they are not two factors, they are two terms because there's a minus sign between them. Okay, so the first step is try to factorize them. Can we factorize them? Okay, you see the only common factor between two are x. Okay, so let's just move x out. Okay, because x is the only common factor. And what would be the things left behind? First of all, you keep the minus sign in the middle. And 2x squared, you get 1x less out there. So that means there should be only 2x, right? How about 3x? X is gone, so that should be 3. Okay, so that's what we call factorization. Right now, you have two factors. Then you can use null factor law, okay? So again, null factor law means after you factorize them, you have x equals 0, or 2x minus 3 equals 0, and x2 equals 0, 2x equals 3, 3 over 2. Okay, so again, there are two answers. Okay, so for this type of question, the factorization can be easily done by just taking out common factor, but you need to recognize what are the common factors. Okay, for this one, I would like to give you more time, like I will give you 2 minutes on this one. I'm going to pause the video, and so you can pause your video as well. Okay, so I hope you've done your solution. Okay, if you haven't, and you pause the video again until you have something done by yourself. All right, so what are the common factors in this question? First of all, let's compare the numbers, 4 and 8. So obviously, 4 is a factor of 8. 4 times 2 equals 8, right? So we could see, let me do a little bit, 4 times 2. And x squared x, and obviously x is a common factor of 2. Okay, so let's take 4 out, and also let's take x out. Okay, you keep the plus sign in the middle. So after 4 and x have gone, what would be left behind in the first term? Okay, so 4 is gone, and x squared, you got 1x out. So you still have 1x left behind. And for the 8, 2 is left behind, and x has gone. Okay, so you see, again, there are two factors. Then you can apply that Null Factor Law again. So that's the whole idea. Try to factorize them into factor form. And okay, so 4x equals 0. That means x must be 0, because 0 divided by 4 is 0. X equals minus 2. Okay, it's done. Okay, so for that example 2, we use taking out common factor to factorize the quadratic equations. Okay, and there are more quadratic equations. Again, there are two terms, but you see x squared 9, 4x squared 49, they don't have common factors, but we can still use other ways to factorize them. This is what we call difference of squares. If you still remember, we've learned that in year 10. So if you have a squared minus b squared, how can we factorize them? You can have a minus b times a plus b. Okay, so this is what we call difference of squares. So once you are in the form of difference of square, then you can factorize them. Okay. Okay, so we learned that in year 10 extension, right? Okay, so let's see how can we do it. X squared minus 9. Okay, so when you compare the x squared minus 9 with the template a squared minus b squared, they are quite similar, but they are not the same. So let's rewrite that 9. Can we rewrite that 9 into a square? Yes. Okay, so 9 is 3 squared. So that actually means x squared minus 3 squared. So, and you will have x minus 3, x plus 3, right? Because that's what this identity suggests. Okay, so after you've got x minus 3 times x plus 3 equals 0, again, Null Factor Law. Okay, the wonderful thing about factorization, if you did that successfully, you will have two factors, and you can use Null Factor Law. So x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, and you'll get the answers. Okay, for the second one, can we use this again? Of course, you have to use it. For the whole example 3, you need to use difference of squares. But how can we use it? Can you see the b square and a square in that case? All right, so I will give you some time to think about the first step. Okay, I will give you like 1 minute. okay, to think about this, okay, whether you can factorize. So the key is, can you see what A is and what B is in this case? Just try to think about this, okay? We'll go back very soon. You can pause the video. Okay, so I hope you've got your own version, you've tried, okay? So the way to get the square out of 4x squared is like, 4 is 2 square, right? 4 is 2 square. So the whole 4x squared can be rewritten as bracket 2x. So the bracket is really important. If you have 2x bracket squared, that means 2x times 2x. Then you go back to 4x squared. So that bracket is important. And how about 49? 49 is 7 square. So again, you have a squared minus b squared in that form. Okay, so a is 2x, b is 7. Okay, so again, you can factorize them, and you can have okay, so I think you will be fine with the word over here. Oh, good. Okay, the last one is a really tricky one. So because 5 is not a square number, unlike 49. So 5 is not a square number. So if you have a non-square number, how can you make it like a square? Is it really possible? Okay, so the first step is the key, right? So how can you get a non-square number into a square? Okay, so that's the problem. So I'll give you like, you try to recall if you could. Okay, 10 seconds. If you can't, then I will give you the hint. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I hope you have been seriously thinking about this, but that's okay if you can't remember, you can't recall it. We definitely we did that in year 10, right? So sum of numbers we call square numbers. Like you can always write 4 equals 2 square, 9 equals 3 square, and what will be 25 equals 5 square, etc. But some numbers, they are not square number. Like, okay, can rewrite 2 as something square. Can rewrite 3 as something square. Can I rewrite 7 as something square, 11 as something square? Okay, so you say, oh, it's impossible because 2 is not a square number, but that's one thing we call square root sign. How about this? Okay, so if you have square root sign, that means that's a square root of 2, and square root of 2 is not, it's just not a whole number, but that's a number. Okay, so square root 2 square will become 2. How about 3? Okay, so why don't we just write square root 3? Okay, square root 3 square equals 3. Okay, that's a definition of square root, and square root 7 and square root 11. So that's the key idea. So let's go back here. So we know 5 is not a square number, but it doesn't mean we can't make it like a square. We can always rewrite that 5 into square root 5 square. So you can always do that. Okay. All right. So after this, and you will say, okay, against square minus square. So I can have that null factor law again. Okay, again, that or, always remember to write the word or. You can't just use comma or and. It must be or. Okay. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so some of you might argue that, so what's the point to learn those square number then every time for whatever number it is? Can we just use square root instead of thinking about the square number? So for example, if I try to do x squared minus 4, okay, so we know that 4 is 2 square. So instead of rewriting 4 as 2 square, can I do this? Yes, and that's no problem, but it's not the best. It just is okay, all right? So you can still do it. You can still solve it. But it just, in your last step, if you leave your answer like this, it's we call not complete. Not completed. You haven't completed your solution because we all know square root 4 is just 2. Okay, so that's why you can always put any number into square root square, okay? But if that number is square number, you need to simplify it anyway in your last step. Is that okay? Good. All right, so these are 3 questions. So we use difference of square. The last question we use taking a common factor, okay? Okay, so that's all for our practice 1. So practice 1 is all about using common factors or difference of square to solve the quadratic equations. And I would like to give you some homework. You can try to do it now by spending like 20 or 30 minutes. You don't need to spend a lot of time. I just want you to have a go to try to familiarize yourself with the skills. Okay, so let's say I would like you to do a little bit on like B. Okay, I would like you to do D. Okay, and I would like you to do this one. Okay, for question 4, I think this one is good, and possibly that one, and possibly that one. Okay, so that you might say, oh, I haven't learned this x squared equals 7x because I always give you like there's a 0 on the right hand side. Okay, you see there's always a 0 on the right hand side because it just make things ready when once you factorize, you can use Null Factor Law. For the use of Null Factor Law, you must get your right hand side equals 0. Okay, so all the equations I show you in the examples, they always get 0 on the right hand side, if you can see. So how about this one? So like I use this one as a quick example, x squared plus 7x. So it's a bit different. But remember, once you try to use factorization to solve the quadratic equations, you need to get the right hand side 0 first. Okay, so in this case, you just need to move that 7x to the left hand side. Okay, and that's it. And then you see 2 terms, and you can just use factorization. X is the only common factor, then you can solve it. You can say x equals 0 or x minus 7 equals 0, and x equals 0 or x equals 7. That's it. Okay, so that's how we do it. So you can think about this one as well. So you need to move the 9 to the left hand side. So I give you 6 questions, and each question might take you less than 5 minutes, like less than 5 minutes. Okay, so let's say you spend 5 minutes and there are 6 of them, so that would be 30 minutes at most. Okay, I think for most of you, possibly around 20 minutes will get the job done. Okay, so that's for my first video. So I hope it helps you to recall some of the things we did in year 10, and before you watch the second video, please try to finish the practice one first. Okay, see you next video.